Hi, welcome back to Author Straight Talk. The last time we were with you, Sarah was in this beautiful barn, and I have to say, what I see behind you is
Not a barn.
beautiful. Is that your normal daily view?
It is. We are very spoiled. I've talked about my mother in the past. I love my mother. My mother is very honest because she's a shrink. My mother hates my house because it is very modern and steel. So because she's so diplomatic, she doesn't say she hates it. She says, Sarah, you have $1 million view from every room. That's what she says. And that's how I know she hates the rest of it. But I can't argue with that because we are very blessed to have a nice view.
And that is Lake Coeur d'Alene, right? Is that okay to say
It
that?
is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, most people don't realize Lake Coeur d'Alene is actually really big. It's, well, 22 miles long. And so we're at the very, very, very south end. So this whole thing, the reason the shades are drawn is because my house will jump from 60 to 85 degrees if we
Yeah.
don't draw the shades.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not trying to be dark here.
Well, probably not a lot of sun. I don't know. Maybe there is, but it's a
No,
gorgeous view. So
yeah, well, I'm wearing this for a reason because it's about, 41 and the trees are starting to bloom because that's really warm for around here. Normally it's about 27 degrees and we came out of the cold freeze where it was 17. So this is balmy.
yeah, and we didn't even plan the matching sweater thing for these
No,
episodes. So,
no, we didn't. We don't have that kind of game. I don't know. My stylist took a break or something. I don't
yeah.
know, chasing moose.
Well, if this is the first edition of Author Straight Talk that you've seen, we've covered a lot of things in this series. We started with money, then we talked about writer's block and inspiration and genres and trends and copyrights and sales and social media. And so there's a lot of things that we've already covered. So if you've not seen any of those videos, make sure you check those out here on her YouTube channel and subscribe too, because then every time we post one, you'll get a little notification as well. But today we want to talk about, I guess, kind of a broad strokes view, the process of writing sort of start to finish. Maybe we've covered a few of these items, in some of the other segments, but let's talk about that today. Like, okay, I want to be an author. I have a story. Walk me through that process beginning to end.
That is a really long process, Chuck.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. In fact, I since I have the book right here, I was going to say, okay, that's a whole lot of pages, and we don't want to, bore people. But can I backtrack and start by giving just a little bit of context
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
that question? Okay, so this gets really people's blood boiling because everybody has a different philosophy. So you've got teachers and you've got workshops and you've got agents, and everybody is advocating a different process for an author. And Truman Capote made this really great quote, and it's in the book, and I hope I don't screw it up too bad, but he basically says, look, if you don't like the rules, just reinvent them to suit yourself. And so the context for what everybody's going to tell you, you can try just like I did. And some are going to work and some are not. And I would like to jump to the point where I can tell you what worked for me. But let me give you just a couple examples of what people will advocate, okay?
All right.
Okay. So one, they'll say, do an outline, make a very linear outline, 5 points and then each sub points and whatnot. And so that's one approach. Another approach somebody will say, just let it flow. Just, it's just going to come. Just let it flow. And, if you were to say that to an NBA player, they'd look at you and just say, no, you have to get your butt out on the court and practice,
Right.
3,000 times,
Right.
right?
Right.
Another example of a process would be to write the end. Forget about the beginning, just write the end. So then you know where you're going. Those approaches, none of those worked for me. The outline felt like it was sucking my soul. The letting it flow ended up with 300 pages of just a mishmash that didn't work at all. And then writing the end was like gilding the lily. I couldn't even make the ending good because I hadn't done the build up. So
Hmm.
if somebody is trying those and they're working, God bless, that's really wonderful. But those are three of the most commonly advocated quote processes that result in failure.
Yeah, I've heard people that are in film say that they typically will film the end of the movie first. So I mean, obviously the whole story is already written before they begin to film, so maybe a little bit different context. But sometimes if you know where the end is, it seems to me like it would be the easiest route to get there. Or if you're somebody like me who plans motorcycle rides, you know where you're going to go, and you have to just you know where you're starting, and so you want to go through. But for you, that didn't work. Did it feel like you were like all over the place, or what?
Well, I'm not dealing with a situation where if I run out of gas, I'm in the middle of the mountains eating snakes.
True. That's
So,
true.
so there's a slight difference there. Okay, so I love the movie thing, and I want to embargo that for just a few minutes because I'm going to give you two different processes that work for me. Okay, and I talk about this in the book. So very briefly, the one process is to use a modified outline, but do it in 3 acts. Now, this came about because I was working with a movie studio down in LA, the creators of Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Law Abiding Citizen and whatnot. And it clarified, I'd already written about 4 books at that time. And they said, look, think about it very simply. Put it into 3 acts. So if you, the viewer, are looking at this, say, okay, I've got 3 acts. And in 3 acts, you literally put down 3 to 5 bullet points of what is going to happen in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. That's it. 3 to 5 bullet points, because it forces you to create that story arc that you're going to go through. Okay, that is not even going to take up one piece of paper. Now, the second process is you say, okay, I've got a little binder that's about this big that I bought at Staples for $6, and I take it on vacation or the plane or wherever. And then I go chapter by chapter. So I take that outline and say, I know where the story arc is going. And I do 3 to 5 paragraphs of bullet points only and write out the first act, the second act, and the third act. And there are some parameters that you can use, Chuck, that identify, okay, so many things are supposed to happen by page 50 or by page 120. And then 150 is the middle of the book. And then you've got your crescendo, and then you need to wrap it up. Going through that process will maybe fill 5 to 10 pages at all. I kind of write small, so maybe it's on the more 5 to 7 pages. The very last thing that you're going to do is then go through those chapters, tag it back to your main characters, and see where the ebbs and flow. So that's a very linear way of doing things. Some people like to think in outlines. That's linear. And then I'm going to tell you about the visual story flow that I do for a different type of fiction. So does that all make sense? Any questions on that?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. But my follow-up to that is, does it change based on the genre? Like you just, what you described to me seems to me like it would work well for fiction, but maybe not for, I don't know, an autobiography or something else. I don't know.
You're absolutely right. So for an autobiography or my nonfiction book, so I've written 4 now, and I absolutely use a standard outline, but that's very different because in a nonfiction book, you're basically going to have typically 10 to 12 chapters, like Author Straight Talk. Okay. So it has 10 chapters, and then I've got the Ask Sarah section at the end. So in each one of those chapters, there's maybe 5 subsections, and within those, there's sub questions. Okay. Super simple. That's why people can churn out nonfiction pretty quickly, because there's no mystery. And also, you're writing for a very specific audience. If I'm writing for startup entrepreneurs, their issues and their subject interest is very narrow. I know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish in that book. Boom, 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 boom. With fiction, you're talking about primary and secondary characters. You have multiple storylines, perhaps. You have to follow this crescendo arc and drop to a degree. And if you're doing a sequel, you actually need to crescendo it, and you actually have to have waves of plot and flow. And that kind of gets into the second way of doing a process for writing a book.
And the second way is?
I know, I was a leader. So this is a very visual. If you're not a person who likes outlines the way that I just described, you can do what is very typical in the movie business. So imagine this wall behind me. Okay, so My World Changed for Chambers, that's action adventure, 5-story book, very complex, a lot of characters that are carrying through the books, but also the books themselves are they're very complex and detailed. So he's like, okay, it's not this complex. And so Lucas is in my living room, different house, but had a lot of windows. And he says, what you have to do before I arrive is you have to get a lot of 3M sticky notes. I'm not kidding you, Chuck, 3M sticky notes. He's like, get a
Okay.
bunch of different colors. And I said, okay, fine, I'll get a bunch of different colors. He says, this is what we do in a storyboard session. And he took me through this actually once at my house, but then when we went down in the studio in LA. So you get a color in your 3M notes for your major characters. And you basically have 3 windows. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. And those are your acts. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. You literally can take in about 10 or 15 minutes each of your characters and flow the major points of that act on your windows. So then after, let's say you've got 6 primary and secondary characters and they're flowing across your windows, then he has another color, and those are all in different colors, another color for like major crisis points. Somebody dies, there's a car wreck, there's a major turning point, and then you place those where it happens. And he said instantaneously, marketing, development, production, actors, directors, managers can see visually what is going on in a 90 or 120-minute movie. And he said you can spot plot points. You can say, oh, there's too many things going on here, but there's nothing going on here. Or this character is totally in Act 2, but they're missing in Act 1 and Act 3. So that, Chuck, totally transformed my writing, because I did that 3 or 4 times with each one of my subsequent books, and it crystallized where my deficiencies were in about 5 minutes. So then I went back to the process I described to you before and went through that. And now I've done it so many times that I don't actually go through the visual anymore. But I did that, I guess, probably 4 to 5 or 6 times. It was amazing. It was really transformative.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. So you have the book there. Hold it up so the world can see it. When we actually started this series, you didn't actually have it in print yet. So now it's available.
Oh, that's right.
So do you go into more detail on these things in the book?
I do. Actually, I break it down by each act, by each process, what you would do, how would you do it, what your outcome's going to be. I actually give you some tips about where to buy the tools. This is not fancy stuff. You do not need to spend a lot of money, but what you need to do is learn what works for your style, for your way of creativity, right, for you to get the juices flowing. I mean, I've mentioned a number of times now that I have a really hard time just being creative in my living room or coming up with new plot ideas. I typically have to just shut everything off and go outside by the pool or by the beach or do something that's different from my environment, because when I'm in my environment, I want to work. I want to get things done. Creating an actual plot line or doing this process I just described, that's work. I mean, you are tactically getting to the details. Okay, this person does this here, then it connects with that there. That's just the technical aspects of writing, which is very different from the creative. So separate those two.
Great information on a little bit of the process and a couple of different ways to do it. And of course, if you want to dig deeper, I would encourage you to get yourself a copy of Author Straight Talk. So where do I get a copy of Author Straight Talk?
Well, there's actually, I'm mixing it up with the new year with 2018. Obviously, you can get it at Barnes & Noble or Amazon or a whole bunch of different places, Kobo, iPhone, lots of different formats, ebook and print and hardbound. I love the hardbound book. I think it's gorgeous. However, I'm starting to use links that are free downloads. So if you check my website, if you check my blog on Goodreads, periodically I have specials that are like a 3-day special. And what you do is you just go up and you just download it for free. And you're not going to have the pretty, wonderful print experience, but you're going to see the cover and you're going to get all the content. I will warn you that some of the tables are a little screwed up, only because that's the nature of ebooks. But look for those freebies if you can't afford the $22 in hardcover. So you can get the content and get going, because as one author to, another aspiring author, get the content, get going, make your dream happen now.
Well, go out and get yourself a copy, whether the free ebook version or the printed version at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever you buy books. They are out there. So next time on Author Straight Talk, we're going to talk about getting the facts right. And I suppose this is especially true in an autobiography or something like that. So we'll cover that in detail next time right here on Author Straight Talk with Sarah Gerdes.